The night was calm, the kind of evening that felt like a gentle exhale after a long, exhausting day. The city lights sparkled in the distance while the quiet hum of the engine filled the inside of the Johnson family's silver SUV. Inside the car, laughter echoed as they drove along a nearly empty stretch of road just outside the city. David Johnson, a tall, composed man in his early 40s, sat behind the wheel with a soft smile on his face. He was usually buried under stacks of case files, spending long days and nights at work. Tonight, however, he had promised his family that work would not steal him away. His wife, Angela, sat beside him, her dark curls framing her warm, intelligent face. In the back seat, their two children, 12-year-old Michael and 7-year-old Emma, sang along to a silly song playing on the radio. Earlier that evening, they had enjoyed a special family dinner at their favorite diner on the outskirts of town. It had been a rare occasion. No phones, no work talk, just genuine connection. David cherished moments like this. As a federal judge, his job often forced him to witness the darkest sides of humanity. Corruption, abuse of power, and countless grim stories of injustice. But tonight, he allowed himself to forget about it all. "Best burger night ever," Michael exclaimed, holding his stomach dramatically. Emma giggled beside him, her small hands clutching her stuffed bunny. Angela glanced back, smiling at their antics. David chuckled. "I told you guys they make the best milkshakes in the county." "Well, next time you're getting the check," Angela teased, nudging him lightly. The moment was perfect, until Angela noticed something in the side mirror. A pair of headlights had been following them for several minutes. At first, she thought it was just another car heading in the same direction. But as David slowed slightly to let them pass, the headlights stayed directly behind them. "David," Angela said quietly, "that car has been behind us for a while." David glanced in the rearview mirror, his sharp eyes narrowing. "Probably nothing," he replied calmly, though his instincts told him otherwise. Years of courtroom experience had given him a knack for reading people and situations. Something about those headlights felt off. A moment later, the vehicle's red and blue lights suddenly flashed, cutting through the darkness like a warning siren. The kids immediately stopped laughing, their joy replaced by confusion and fear. "Daddy, are we in trouble?" Emma whispered, clutching her bunny tighter. "No, sweetheart," David said in his calm, reassuring voice. "We haven't done anything wrong. It's probably just a routine stop." He pulled the SUV over to the shoulder of the road, his movements deliberate and steady. Angela's hand reached for his arm. "Be careful," she said softly, worry creeping into her tone. Two police officers emerged from the vehicle, their posture already aggressive. One was tall and broad-shouldered, his hand hovering near his holstered weapon. The other, younger and thinner, carried a flashlight that cut sharply through the darkness, shining directly into the Johnsons' car. David lowered his window and rested his hands calmly on the steering wheel, following every rule he had taught others about traffic stops. "Good evening, officers," he said politely. "Is there a problem?" The taller officer didn't respond right away. His eyes scanned the inside of the car, lingering on Angela and the kids before settling back on David. There was no warmth. In his gaze, only suspicion. "License and registration," he barked, his tone sharp and commanding. David reached slowly toward the glove compartment. "Of course," he said evenly. "May I ask why I was pulled over?" The younger officer circled to the passenger side, shining his light in Angela's face. "We'll ask the questions here," he snapped, making Emma flinch and bury her face in her mother's shoulder. Angela's protective instincts kicked in. "There's no need to scare my children," she said firmly, her voice trembling only slightly. The younger officer smirked. "Then you better keep them quiet." David felt anger rising inside Step out? For what reason? Don't argue. The officer growled, his hand now resting on his weapon. Step out. Now. Angela's heart pounded. This is ridiculous. We're just driving home. Ma'am, stay in the vehicle, the younger officer shouted, his voice echoing in the still night. David turned to his wife and children, his face calm but his eyes serious. It's okay, he said softly. Stay calm. I'll handle this. He opened the door slowly and stepped out into the cold night air. The gravel crunching under his shoes sounded unnaturally loud in the tense silence. The officers closed, in, their flashlights creating harsh, dramatic shadows. Michael pressed his face against the window, fear etched across his young features. What are they doing to Dad? Angela wrapped her arm around him, holding him tight. It's going to be okay, she whispered, though her own voice wavered. David stood tall, his hands visible, projecting calm authority. Officers, you're making a mistake, he said firmly but respectfully. If you just explain... Quiet, the tall officer barked, cutting him off. From the corner of his eye, David noticed other vehicles slowing down to watch. A few drivers even pulled out their phones to record. A bad feeling settled deep in his chest. This was no routine stop. This was about to become something much, much worse. The taller officer took a menacing step closer. You think you're above the law? He sneered. We'll see about that. David met his gaze unflinching. His voice was calm, but there was a quiet power behind his words. You have no idea who you're dealing with, he said evenly. But soon, you will. The wind picked up, rustling the trees along the roadside as the stage was set for a confrontation that would change everything. Not just for the Johnson family, but for the entire city. Gravel crunched as David stepped away from the SUV, hands open and visible. The taller officer moved in close, the beam of his flashlight a harsh circle on David's face. Turn around, hands on the hood, he ordered. For what, officer? David asked, steady. You've given no cause. The younger officer swaggered to Angela's window again, the light stabbing into the car. Ma'am, keep your hands where I can see them. Kids, too. Emma whimpered. Michael clenched his jaw, trying not to cry. Angela's pulse pounded in her ears. Please stop scaring. My children. The tall officer shoved David's shoulder. On the hood. Now. David complied, breathing deep. You're escalating something that didn't need to be. Stop telling us how to do our job, the younger officer snapped. Reckless driving, suspicious behavior, possible stolen vehicle. That's a lie, Angela shot back. Our registration is in the glove box, insurance in the visor. He offered you both. The tall officer barked over her. Ma'am, one more word and you'll be detained for obstruction. 2 more squad cars rolled up, bathing the road in SUV. "Dad!" Michael shouted, shoving the door open before Angela could stop him. "Stay in the car." 3 officers roared at once. One stepped forward, palm out, making Michael stumble back. Emma's cry cracked into sobs. Angela was out of the car now, hands up, fury flashing through the tears. "This is unlawful." He complied with every instruction. He asked for the reason for the stop. "You never gave it. You could not put him in cuffs because you're offended he knows the law." "Ma'am, return to the vehicle," the younger officer repeated, voice rising as if volume could substitute for authority. "Officer," Angela said, planting her feet, voice honed by 1,000 courtroom objections, "state your statutory basis for detention and arrest." "Now." "We're recording. Everyone is." Phones tilted closer. A woman across the road called out, "Let him go. He didn't do anything." A man added, "You never told him why you stopped him." The tall officer tightened the cuffs another notch. Pain needled up David's arms. He restrained the reaction. He turned his head just enough for his voice to carry to the SUV. "Michael, Emma, look at me." The children looked through the glass, wet-eyed, breath fogging faint crescents. "Breathe. In. Out. I'm okay." "You think you're clever," the tall officer hissed, leaning close. "People like you always think the rules don't apply." David's gaze didn't flinch. "The rules do apply. That's the problem for you." The younger officer stepped between Angela and David like a curtain. "Ma'am, last warning. Back in the car." Angela lifted her chin. "You warn me while you violate my husband's rights in front of our children. No, you answer for this." Another cruiser rolled up. The sergeant stepped out, older, watchful, already calculating risk and optics. He took in the tableau. The cuffed man, the trembling kids, the chorus of phones, the hard set of Angela's jaw. "What have we got?" he asked, voice clipped. "Reckless driving, non-compliance, possible stolen vehicle." The younger officer rattled. "Did you verify registration?" the sergeant asked without looking at him. "He didn't. Hand," the officer stammered. Angela, eyes locked on the sergeant, held up the documents through the window. "License, registration, proof of insurance." He offered them twice. The sergeant's mouth tightened, irritation at his own men flickering, and then vanishing, replaced by a reflexive shield. He nodded once to the tall officer, a signal read as permission to continue. "Load him," the tall officer said. "Don't you dare," Angela breathed. 2 officers guided, pushed David toward the rear cruiser. He didn't resist. He looked over his shoulder at his family, the quiet promise sealed in the space between them. "You have no idea what you're doing," he said, voice even, carrying just enough to reach the phones and the knife. "But soon, the whole world will." They sat him in the back seat, the door shut with a hard, decisive thud. The younger officer moved to Angela's window again, impatience curdling into hostility. Keys out of the ignition, hands on the dash. Angela's hand trembled as she killed the engine. "Michael, hold your sister's hand," she whispered. "Look at me. We are together. We are safe. We will fix this." Outside, the sergeant barked short orders. Tow request, inventory, transport. Inside, Emma whispered, "Mommy, is Daddy going to jail?" Angela swallowed. "No, baby. They made a mistake, and we're going to make it right." The bystanders began narrating for their own cameras. They cuffed him for nothing. He kept asking for the reason. They never said. Hashtags formed out loud. "Traffic stop. Know your rights. Let him go." A teenage girl across the road said, "I got the whole thing," to no one in particular, and everyone at once. Angela met the sergeant's eyes through the windshield, unwavering. "You just handcuffed a man who followed every rule in front of his children," she said, voice low, dangerous. "My name is Angela Johnson. Remember it. You will see it again." The sergeant didn't answer. He looked away first. Red, blue lights kept strobing against the trees as the cruiser with David inside pulled off the shoulder. The night swallowed the sound of its tires. In the back seat, David leaned his head against the cool plexiglass and closed his eyes. Not in defeat, but in restraint. He counted his breaths. He cataloged names, badge numbers, timestamps. He replayed every word. His, theirs, the crowd's. He pictured the dashcam lens blinking its indifferent red dot. He pictured the truth, already on its way to daylight. Back, at the SUV, Angela exhaled, steadying. She reached for her phone and hit 2 contacts. One marked counsel, the other simply record. Her voice was no longer shaking. "This is Angela Johnson. I need you to listen carefully," she said into the receiver, as the shadows of the patrol cars stretched long across the road. "They made a mistake they can't unmake." The metal cuffs dug into David's wrists as the cruiser sped through the nearly deserted streets. The rhythmic flash of red and blue lights painted the inside of the car, a cruel reminder of the humiliation he had just endured. David sat utterly still, his face calm but his mind racing with precision. Years of courtroom experience had trained him to think clearly, even when surrounded by chaos. The tall officer sat in the front passenger seat, glancing back occasionally with smug satisfaction. "Thought you could talk your way out of this, huh?" he muttered, shaking his head. "You people always think you're above the law." David's voice was quiet and steady. "The law applies to everyone, officer, even you." The officer snorted. "Yeah, we'll see about that when you're processed." David didn't answer. He simply shifted slightly to relieve the pressure on his wrists and focused on the memory of his children's terrified faces. Michael's trembling lip, Emma's tear-filled eyes, they were the only reason he hadn't fought back. The humiliation wasn't for him alone. It was for them, too, and he would make sure they never had to suffer like this again. At the station, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as David was led inside. Other officers glanced up curiously, some recognizing his composed demeanor as unusual for a man in cuffs. Angela arrived moments later, rushing through the doors with her phone pressed to her ear. She was flanked by her closest friend, a civil rights attorney named Marcus Reed, whose face was already stormy with fury. "Where is my husband?" Angela demanded, her voice echoing through the lobby. "This is a mistake, and you're all about to find yourselves in a courtroom." The desk sergeant looked uneasy. "Ma'am, please lower your voice." "No," Marcus snapped, stepping forward. "You illegally detained a man without probable cause, and now you're trying to silence his wife? Not a chance." Before the sergeant could respond, a young officer rushed over, whispering urgently in his ear. The sergeant's face paled as he glanced toward the holding area. His hands began to tremble slightly as he reached for the phone. "What's going on?" Angela demanded. The sergeant's voice was tight. We may have made a serious error." Meanwhile, outside the station, the world was already catching fire. The teenage girl who had recorded the entire traffic stop uploaded the video to social media. Within minutes, it spread like wildfire. The hashtags True Justice for David and EWA, Traffic Stop Truth, trended nationally. Viewers were horrified as they watched the calm, polite man being handcuffed while his wife and children screamed in the background. Thousands of angry comments flooded in. "This is abuse of power. These cops need to be fired immediately. Protect and serve, more like harass and humiliate." News outlets caught wind of the story, replaying the video on a loop. Anchors spoke with outrage as they described a mystery man wrongfully detained during a traffic stop. By the time David was placed in a holding cell, his name was already on every major network. Back in the holding area, David Marcus held up his phone, where a live newsfeed played. The viral video had already reached millions of views. Reporters outside the station were calling for statements, demanding accountability. The sound of angry protesters was audible even from inside the building. The chief wiped sweat from his brow. "Judge Johnson, please, let us handle this internally." "No," David interrupted sharply. "This won't be buried in some internal investigation. Every badge number, every threat, every unlawful act will be exposed in court." Angela took his hand, her eyes blazing with determination. "Our children saw everything. We won't let this trauma be for nothing." The chief looked as if he might collapse under the weight of the situation. He turned to the officers, his voice trembling. "Both of you, badge and gun, now. You're suspended pending investigation." The tall officer shook his head in disbelief. "This isn't fair. We didn't know who he was." David's gaze was like a blade. "That's exactly the problem. You shouldn't have to know someone's title to treat them with dignity and respect." Outside, the protest crowd grew louder, chanting David's name. Reporters shoved microphones toward the station doors. News tickers across the nation flashed headlines. "Traffic stop of federal judge sparks national outrage." "Police department under fire after viral arrest video." David walked out beside Angela, the crowd parting, for them like a wave. Flashes from cameras lit the night as protesters raised signs demanding justice. Michael and Emma, now safely in their grandparents' arms, reached for their parents, clinging tightly. For the first time that night, David allowed himself a small, determined smile. The truth was out. There was no going back. The officers who had mocked and humiliated him were about to face the full weight of the law, and the entire world was watching. The crowd outside the police station was no longer just a group of curious onlookers. It had grown into a sea of angry faces, holding signs and chanting for accountability. "Justice for Judge Johnson," they roared in unison, their voices carrying into the night sky. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed like lightning, and the tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. Inside the station, the atmosphere was even more chaotic. The police chief's office was packed with city officials, lawyers, and journalists demanding statements. The chief himself sat hunched over his desk, pale and sweating, as he realized there was no way to contain the disaster. The viral video had now surpassed 10 million views in just a few hours. Clips of David's arrest were being replayed on every major news network, and hashtags like "Shield Justice for David" and "News" and "End Police Abuse" were trending worldwide. David stood calmly beside Angela, his hand resting on her shoulder. Despite the chaos around them, his posture was unshaken, his expression resolute. He had spent years fighting corruption in courtrooms, but now he was the one at the center of the storm. He knew exactly what needed to happen next. The mayor arrived, pushing through the crowd of reporters. His face was grim as he extended his hand to David. "Judge Johnson," the mayor said formally, "on behalf of the city, I offer my deepest apologies for what has happened tonight." David didn't take the handshake. His voice was calm, but carried an unmistakable weight. "Apologies don't undo trauma, Mayor," he said. "My wife, my children, and I were treated like criminals because certain officers believe their power places them above the law. This isn't just about me. This is about every family who doesn't have a title or position to protect them." Angela squeezed his hand, pride shining in her eyes. Michael and Emma were nearby with their grandparents, watching their father with a mixture of awe and relief. The mayor swallowed hard. "We're launching a full investigation. The officers involved have been suspended and will cooperate, with federal oversight to ensure transparency." David's gaze was piercing. Suspension isn't enough. They will face charges, and this department will face reform. No more cover-ups. No more hiding behind badges while abusing the public. Trust. Outside, the chants grew louder. A protest leader held a megaphone and shouted, "We won't stop until justice This case will not be swept under the rug. Not while I draw breath. Angela stepped forward, her voice fierce and unwavering. Our children deserve to grow up in a world where they can trust the police, not fear them. No mother should have to explain to her kids why the people in uniform treated their father like a criminal. She looked toward the reporters, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. We will fight this battle, not just for our family, but for every family who has ever suffered in silence. Back at the police station, the officers involved sat in a conference room, stripped of their badges and weapons. The tall officer, who had mocked David earlier, stared blankly at the table, his career and freedom slipping away. "You don't understand," he muttered weakly. "We didn't know who he was." A federal investigator across from him responded coldly. "That's exactly the problem. You shouldn't need to know someone's title to treat them with basic respect. This is going to court, and you will answer for every second of that stop." The younger officer broke into a cold sweat. "We were just following procedure." "No," the investigator interrupted sharply. "You were following prejudice, and now the world has seen it." Weeks passed, but the firestorm never faded. The trial was broadcast nationally, with millions tuning in to watch the proceedings. Witnesses testified, videos were replayed, and the truth was laid bare. The jury deliberated for only a few hours before returning with a unanimous verdict. Guilty. The officers were sentenced. The department was forced into sweeping reforms, and new policies were enacted to prevent future abuses. The day of the verdict, David walked out of the courthouse with Angela and their children on his side. Reporters surrounded them, shouting questions, but David stopped for a brief statement. "Justice isn't about revenge," he said, his voice calm and resolute. "It's about accountability. It's about ensuring that those with power serve the people, not themselves. This victory isn't just ours. It belongs to every person who has ever been wronged, and to every voice that refused to be silenced." Michael looked up at his father, eyes wide with admiration. "Dad," he asked softly, "why did they treat us like that?" David knelt down so he was eye level with his son.